Welcome everyone back to Core Conversations. I am Charlie Thomas, the Executive Director of the Association for Core Texts and Courses, ACTC, and I am so happy to introduce Seemee Ali to you all today. She's our second speaker in the 2021-2022 Core Conversation series. But before we get to that, a couple of quick announcements. However you found your way to ACTC, we're glad you're here. Most people find their way to ACTC through our conference program. And because of the pandemic, we have not been able to meet face-to-face for a couple of years, but we are planning to meet in April at Notre Dame, and we hope you'll join us. If you go to our website, coretext.org, registration is open, and panel and paper proposal forms are available to you. Proposals are due February 5th. Registration is due by April 5th, and the conference begins April 21st at Notre Dame. So very much hope to see you there. If you have any trouble registering or you need any support in that regard, please reach out to me, and I will help you to get registered. We're all very much looking forward to seeing each other in Notre Dame. It's been too long, and so please come join us for the conference. But now, Core Conversations. Core Conversations are two parts, recorded remarks and a live conversation. So this is part one of Seemee's Core Conversation. Part two will be January 21st at noon Eastern time, and we'll have 45 minutes to talk together about Seemee's remarks, about Homer, about whatever this talk inspires you to want to discuss with Seemee and each other. As much as possible, we try to make these conversations open-ended and serious and enjoyable. So if you can, please join us on January 21st. And the information to join that Zoom will also be available on the ACTC webpage. But enough preliminaries. Our speaker today is Seemee Ali, president of the Dallas Institute of Humanities and Culture, and a great friend of ACTC. Seemee and I met through ACTC and have had many marvelous conversations there and elsewhere because of that connection. And so I am very appreciative that she was willing to come and be part of this today. Before Seemee took the position of president of the Dallas Institute, she was an academic. She was at Carthage College, where she taught in the Great Ideas program and the English department, and where she was the chair of the Intellectual Foundations program, which was the freshman core curriculum at Carthage. So today we're going to talk about Homer, or Seemee's going to talk about Homer, and I have the privilege of asking maybe one question or two at the end, but all of you are invited to ask your own questions when we gather again live. So please take note and come ready so that we can have a great conversation. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to you, Seemee. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Charlie. I am a great fan of the ACTC, and it has been the home for many, many remarkable conversations and some of the most cherished friendships I've formed in my career. So thank you for taking care of this remarkable program. So I would like to talk about Homer, and I would like to talk about Homer in this particular cultural moment, why Homer matters now. And in order to do so, I will offer just a few personal comments, only because they help to illustrate the larger idea that I would like to communicate about what it means to read Homer now, today, in this challenging time. So the audience of these ACTC videos know all too well the challenges, financial and otherwise, facing undergraduate institutions, generally, liberal arts colleges particularly. And I'm speaking today as an exile from a world I loved, a secure world I inhabited as a tenured professor at a small liberal arts college where I could reliably encounter poetic and philosophic wisdom in the company of unjaded, open-minded, and open-hearted young people. It is a cliche, of course, to say that one learns from one's students, but one does. And what I learned while I inhabited that world is that our students are lightning rods, receiving and assimilating the shocks of a changing time. Our students are asking questions. They're asking questions with their bodies sometimes, if not their minds. My husband, an emeritus philosophy professor, has remarked that questions that used to be, they used to seem as if they were the province only of philosophy, are now existential questions. What is a man? What is a woman? Veterans who participated in the United States' years-long engagement in Afghanistan are now wondering, Achilles-like, what is the meaning of honor? On this question, I really want to recommend a novel by a Dallas writer named Ben Fountain. It's called Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. I earnestly recommend this book. It is an articulation of the warrior's dilemma. It will feel Homeric to those who are familiar with Homer, and it will feel utterly contemporary to those who may not be. But to repeat, our students are asking serious questions with their bodies, sometimes with their minds, even as the institutions dedicated to their education are convulsing with financial and existential distress. The advance of science and technology makes it possible for radical reconsiderations and revisions of once irreversible dictates of nature. The collective erosion of confidence in once unimpeachable ideas, freedom of speech, meritocracy, liberal democracy, emerges in our young students as anxiety, as we see again and again. So I'm not here to offer answers. I'm not here to wring my hands or offer moral judgment. Rather, I want to say that precisely for these reasons, Homer is the poet for our time. And in the comments that follow, I will be occasionally citing from a book that I've been writing alongside Michael McShane, the aforementioned philosophy professor, my husband, to whom I owe a great deal in my considerations of Homer. So let's consider the famous opening of the Iliad. A single freighted word, Greek, menis. As we go forward, I would invite our audience to think about the resonance of the opening scene of the Iliad set forth in its proem. Think about that resonance with the present moment. So let's talk about menis first. That word is conventionally understood as divine wrath, as we think about why Homer matters so urgently now. Menis, the prerogative of gods, is distinct from ordinary human anger. In an illuminating and slim book about this remarkable term, the classicist Leonard Muellner theorizes that menis is not just a term for an emotional state. Rather, every time the word is invoked, Muellner writes, the hierarchy of the cosmos is at stake. In Greek, cosmos means order. In the Iliad, as in our time, human beings order their lives through claims to authority, often grounded in the past or in past ideas about what nature is. But under scrutiny, the past looks problematic for the characters in the Iliad, as it looks to us and to our students now. When Achilles questions glory alone, the goal of Kleos as a reason for fighting in the war in the Iliad, he sets in motion something of an intellectual revolution. That revolution begins in book 1 of the Iliad and it ends in book 24. So back to menis as a phenomenon that reorders the cosmos. By opening, the epic with this charged word. The Iliad announces its cosmic scope right at the beginning. And of course, generations of commentators have observed that the Iliad's opening line departs significantly from other ancient representations of Manus, where it tends to be reserved for divine anger alone. Only the gods can feel Manus, it would seem. Strikingly, in the Iliad, the word pertains to a mortal hero. Divine fury, somehow born in a fragile mortal vessel, is thus the epic's first concern. Furthermore, who or what can exert celestial force is problematized in the epic's first utterance. The suppression of any reference to Achilles' divine mother in the opening lines of the poem only emphasizes the incongruity of the mortal figure unleashing divine fury. So in claiming this power, Manus, for human beings, the Iliad begins by breaching a fundamental ontological threshold, the boundary that normally separates mortals from immortals, the very boundary that should prohibit human beings from exerting divine power. A hero who exerts Manus is poised to defy gravity, ready to vault menacingly from the middling position of humanity to the lofty realm of the gods. Achilles simply rejects the old way of being human. Certainly, the Iliad's poem shows the safe middle space of human life disappearing as it depicts the consequences of Achilles' Manus. In fact, it looks like the food chain has flipped upside down. We see scavenging dogs and birds feasting on human flesh. The opening vision is vivid and dismal. It upsets a primal sense of order, even in us, even now in 2022. The scope of the poem's concern extends well beyond the human framework. For not only human identity, but the cosmos itself, the entire hierarchy of animate life, beasts, men, gods, appears to be collapsing in confusion when the epic begins. The center cannot hold, as another poet offers. Consider also the brutal reception that Agamemnon offers Apollo's priest, Chryses, when he appears amongst the Greeks on a mission to ransom his daughter. The common soldiers seemingly all cry out to urge their ruler to accede to the priest's entirely civil request, so politely proffered. But the leader, Agamemnon, is almost unspeakably rude to the representative of Apollo, sending him away empty-handed with curses and threats. It's a gross violation of the code of hospitality known as xenia. It might have been unthinkable if the moral codes that hold this community together were healthy. But this opening, this rudeness on Agamemnon's part is already a sign of something rotten at the core, a kind of decadence amongst the Greeks, which Agamemnon himself seems to represent. And of course, it's not long before a plague erupts amongst the Greeks. This too is a sign that something radical must change. It's hard not to think when you read about this plague at the opening of the Iliad or at the opening of Oedipus or so many other ancient texts about the consequences of our own plague right now and the social implications, the political implications that such a plague brings with it. Perhaps the clearest expression of the topsy-turvy cosmos comes in Book 5, when Diomedes, the great mortal warrior, looks like he's divine. Athena gives him special distinction with a flame carrying, over his head. There, Diomedes attacks and injures a number of the gods, Aphrodite and Ares. And this ought to be shocking to us. It ought to be shocking to the audience of the Iliad that a human being might simply attack and wound gods. But as we see, even in book 5, the gods are world weary. They're used to being attacked. And one begins to wonder, where does this story end? Let me pause here. My own thinking about epic literature is deeply informed by my long study with Louise Cowan, whose theory of poetic genre is not as well known as it should be. Dr. Cowan was herself a great friend of the ACTC and long connected with its formation and many conferences. But let me quote from Louise Cowan's essay on the epic genre as a way of grounding my claim that Homer's work is vitally important to us right now, in this very moment. So her essay is called The Epic as Cosmopoiesis, or The Epic as Cosmos Making. Dr. Cowan writes in that essay, the epic imagination is pulled two ways, toward death and birth, and engaged in a double mode of vision, both elegiac and prophetic. Its endeavor is to tell a story in which people honor and sin against their gods, one in which they transcend ordinary limits, and in the telling, to create a world large enough to contain the full dimensions of the story. Elsewhere in the same essay, Cowan describes the way in which epic poetry creates metaphysical space. In other words, this kind of literature does not simply imitate life. It creates a new possibility for our understanding and feeling for history, even as it creates a new possibility of our imagination of the future. So the epic imagination serves as a kind of hinge between one epoch and another. And surely we feel that sense of epic change right now in our world today. Whatever side of the political spectrum we occupy, our pieties are being challenged. Serious people are asking, what, if anything, from the past should we teach our children? Serious people wonder if teaching Homer, teaching the Iliad is somehow dangerous. Maybe because in their view, it glorifies a masculine warrior culture. Or maybe because it represents some elite understanding of what matters. Or more radically, because college education is expensive and teaching such a long and difficult work does not obviously help either colleges or college students pay their bills. Moreover, fewer and fewer people making these decisions about what gets read and what doesn't have actually read the texts being called into question. So why does Homer matter now? How does one approach the intimidating wall of words that the Iliad or the Odyssey present? So let's think again about the sense of an epic and its ending. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, these questions are crystallized in the form of images. And I'm speaking about a word, a Greek word, idola, or eidolon. Idola is the plural. This word means image, and it appears only sparingly in both texts. So both the Iliad and the Odyssey. So in the Iliad, an eidolon, that word applies to the image of Aeneas that Apollo creates in book 5, and to the image of Patroclus that Achilles encounters in book 23. In the Odyssey, the word eidolon refers to an image of Penelope's sister that Athena creates in book 4, and also to shades in the underworld that we encounter first in Odysseus' story In book 11, his story of going to Hades, Elpenor, Achilles, Heracles appear to him as idola. The word reappears when the prophet warns Theoclymenus, warns the suitors of their fate in book 20. And we see the word again when we watch the suitors entering the underworld in book 24 of the Odyssey. These moments, every time this word eidolon appears in both epics, these moments represent an encounter with a reality beyond oneself, beyond encounters with reality beyond oneself, beyond normal sensory insight. And perhaps the story of Heracles is the most remarkable example. So I'll very briefly read those lines from book 11 and just mark them perhaps for our conversation, aware that my time is limited in this presentation. So let me begin by saying that Heracles appears in the Iliad many, many times. And clearly his story is one that we are meant to measure the story of Achilles against. We might decide that Heracles in the Iliad is not only an ancient and appealing folk hero whose charisma Homer must acknowledge and limit to draw the portrait of Achilles, but also a powerful dimension of Achilles' own imagination. And there's another version of this imagining of an ancient hero in the story of Heracles given to us in Odyssey 11. So it's a kind of confusing portrait that Odysseus himself paints of Heracles. What Odysseus sees, he reports, is an eidolon. As for the real Heracles, Odysseus tells us he himself, and the Greek word is autos, so Heracles himself delights among the gods immortal in their festivities. And he has for his wife fair-haired Hebe, the daughter of the great Zeus and golden-sandaled Hera. He enjoys life on Olympus at the same time that his eidolon appears to Odysseus in Hades. And right after having evoked the golden light of Olympus, then Odysseus emphasizes the menacing quality of Heracles's eidolon, the image. So the clamor, I'm reading from Odyssey 11, lines 605 through 608, the clamor of the dead about him, about Heracles, was like that of birds fleeing every direction in fright. He was like dark night, holding his naked bow and an arrow on the bowstring, glaring dreadfully like one about to shoot. The character of this eidolon or image, or we might say the double of Heracles, bears obvious resemblance to the marauding Heracles we might recognize from remembrances in the Iliad. Curiously, however, nowhere in the Iliad is the glorious immortality of Heracles, widely assumed in later tradition, mentioned. Rather, the Iliad's concern is with the same menacing Heraclean figure that Odysseus encounters. So Odysseus's description continues. This is again from book 11 of the Odyssey. Round his chest was a horrifying belt, a golden baldric where wondrous things were fashioned. Bears, wild boars, lions with bright eyes, fights and battles, murders and manslaughters. Would that he hadn't made it and that he make no other, he who designed that baldric with his art, his technique. So here Odysseus's emphasis upon the terrifying skill of the artist, the technician, in creating wondrous things, both natural, the bears, the boars, the lions on the baldric, and man-made, fights, battles, murders, manslaughters, the baldric itself, is a reminder, it's an ekphrastic reminder of the artist, you might say, of this scene. In other words, it's a sign from Homer himself, the artist who created the wondrous horror of the Iliad, and an eidolon of Heracles, unlike any glamorous or cultic image of the hero who might win immortality upon Olympus. As we encounter this Heracles, this dark eidolon, we might recall that Heracles' story is told in fits and starts, at sometimes incongruous moments in the epic action of both the Iliad and the Odyssey. And it is upon reflection only, when we have leisure to reflect, that the shards of this image come together. And as we piece together the story of Heracles' tale, and we imagine that Heracles, the one we see in Hades, the one we imagine on Olympus, the better one might begin to see the difference between the new heroes, Achilles and Odysseus, as we contrast him with that one, Heracles. As Odysseus emerges from Hades with renewed hope of a successful journey home, it is perhaps the stark and menacing underworld vision of Heracles that he must also remember to achieve a longed for homecoming. It is that dark vision rather than the shining immortal one, which represents the fantasy of the glorious warrior's rewards that Odysseus will remember on his way home. So with this astonishing depiction of Heracles' eidolon, Homer seems to offer a kind of double possibility, an elusive theory, you might say, a radical freedom on the part of the artist, on the part of the epic hero, and ultimately on the part of the epic audience to reimagine the past. There is one Heracles who lives on Olympus, and there is another, a darker one in Hades. He exists simultaneously on two planes of reality at the same moment in time. The artist can choose to show us Heracles' life on one of these planes, both, or neither. Would that he hadn't made it, that image, and he make no other. That doubleness I would like to propose, in the spirit of questioning and openness, is a way for us to imagine this epic moment now in which we live, and which we might offer to our own students as we try to imagine what is it from the past we hold on to, what is it we take forward in the future? How do we imagine what seems to be fixed? How do we reimagine what we'd like to shift? Thank you.
Thank you, Seemee. I love Homer so much, and I love your reading of Homer, and I'm very aware of our time, but I have so many questions. So so thank you. That I'm ready to talk to you for days about these important, really important and interesting things. So one very, very quick comment, one too complicated question. I apologize in advance, but maybe we could play with it a little bit and talk about it more on January 21st when we gather others into this conversation. So the very quick comment is some of your comments early on about the way that beginning with Manus, signals, announces the cosmic scope of the Iliad, and also as you're talking about Louise Cowan's theories of poetic formation and this act of cosmopoiesis, it strikes me how important and apt and for me irreplaceable Homer is at the beginning of many of our core programs, not just because it's old or oldest, although I have a feeling that its sort of oldness has something to do with the tradition as a whole, but that it is a singular text when it comes to opening a world in the classroom that you can inhabit with your students. And I find that even though in Mercer's Great Books program, we start with Homer, and I teach that first class, and I can't imagine not doing that, I also find ways to put Homer at the beginning of other things. When I teach ancient philosophy, which typically you begin with the pre-Socratics, I begin with Homer because it's sort of an important first step for me. And so the first is just a kind of a thank you comment for helping me think more coherently about why it's not just Homer's sort of firstness in a chronological sense, but a quality of the epic that makes it so so important and so powerful as an opening text or an opening world to inhabit with your students in the classroom. So thank you for that. And now the way too complicated question. It's on this issue of doubling that you we're talking about in terms of Heracles' Eidolon at the end. And it strikes me that the Iliad is just full of doubling, and doubling that is that really helps us understand or get our way into the epic. And I'm going to say two things and stop, because I could say 70, but let me say two things and stop. So Eva Brand came to Mercer years ago, and I was asking her about Odysseus's second journey, carrying the oar inland until someone mistakes it for a winnowing fan, and how we're supposed to make sense of that. And one of the things that Eva said was, Homer always teaches us how to read Homer, and we have what Odysseus is told to do is to take the oar inland and place it into the ground, and we have another instance of an oar being placed into the ground, and it's Elpenor, and it's the grave of Elpenor. And so Eva says she thinks that journey has something to do with Odysseus burying his seafaring self. Where does she get that? From the doubling of the image. And so this is the last thing I'll say. So the doubling that I'm really very, very interested in is about this first scene, and what you talk about is a kind of a rottenness to the core of the Greeks. That seems to be that situation seems to be set up by Agamemnon and Achilles, and they're just impossibility of them kind of inhabiting the same world. But we see a doubling of that in book 23 with Menelaus and Antilochus in the chariot race, and it goes differently. And in that situation, Achilles is neither in the role of, he's in neither of the human roles. He seems to be in the divine role. So I guess, again, I could keep going, but I'll stop. But I wonder if you see a doubling in those two scenes. That is the argument between Achilles and Menelaus in book 23 to book 1, and also what you think Achilles' role is, or what because it seems related to Manus. I mean, he's out of his cosmic order. He should not be operating as a god, and yet he kind of works it out really, really brilliantly and averts disaster and resolves the problem. So what do you make of that?
Oh gosh. Okay. So,
and you can just say, we'll talk about this together on January 21st if you'd like.
I would like to look at it together, because if those are the lines that I am thinking of, it is quite remarkable that Achilles smiles once and only once in the entirety of the Iliad, and I'm pretty sure it's there. So let's come back to that. And maybe, and thank you for listening so carefully and joyfully. It is important to kind of think about firstness and Homer's stature as something other than chronological. So could I just return there, and then we could come to this other conversation about the doubling. So it looks like the more I read Homer, the more I see him marking an end. So there's an end of the heroic age, and this may be controversial to some, in some contexts, but I think a number of people who read the Iliad see the heroic age ending and being marked as ending in the Iliad, and the Odyssey as a kind of commencement of something new and different, an entirely different way of being. And then, of course, there is the beginning of writing that we see in the stories of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which we receive as written texts. And so there's a kind of shift that's part of the fabric of the poem and the way we enter into the epic that way. And it looks like, with the very first reference to writing in the Iliad as poisonous symbols, when we hear that someone's ancestor receives some weird thing on clay. What is it? Well, it turns out to be an order for his murder, right? These poisonous symbols are the first reference we have to writing. So there are all these shifts and signs and indications in the Iliad, and I think they're clearly also there in the Odyssey. That would be another conversation, but that sense of the whole order of being changing is something that on the one hand can be sort of, we can point to technology changing. This is also why Hephaestus is such an important figure in the Iliad in particular, but there is something that we feel in our hearts as being wrong, right? Being really, really wrong with the old order of things. And the figure of Achilles, the youngest one in the war, right, taking on and seeing what is wrong and feeling it so powerfully and not always articulating it successfully, right? That matters very much. And I think that somehow he's working it out in front of us. What's wrong with the old ways? Why aren't they working? Why do I give up on this whole idea of fighting for glory? Right? We're watching that happen. And I think that doubleness, to come back to doubling, and the idola, to use the plural form of the word, we're all measuring ourselves up against ideals when we're ambitious for ourselves. Achilles, where are his ideals? Where are they? So the idola seem to be different representations of possibility. The fact that the word is used so rarely, I find to be quite fascinating. So it's the word that Achilles uses, or that we see when he encounters the ghost of Patroclus. And that's the doubling, I think, more than the doubling of the sort of judgments and political circumstances. It's the way he sees himself when Hector puts on his armor. First Patroclus, then Hector puts on his armor. It's the way he sees Patroclus as an image that does not have corporal substance, an image that is somehow not part of something he can grasp, literally, that suggests to him that there's a new story to be told. I think that has philosophic implications, of course. And then perhaps these other doublings are different versions of this. What would it be like if Achilles were a ruler? Right, there's our one example, book 23. He's pretty chill, and he is interested in excellence, and yet he somehow is able to navigate the difficulties that excellent people create. So perhaps that kind of wisdom comes with accepting your death. I'm not sure, but that would be my tentative answer there.
I know that I have to stop this now, and so I will. But I am so glad that we will have some more time to talk about this. Thank you, Seemee, so much.
My pleasure, Charlie. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this. Please join us and be a part of our conversation on January 21st at noon Eastern time. I will make sure that the link to the Zoom goes out through social media and email and on our website. So I hope you'll be able to find us and join us and talk to Seemee about all of these things and any part of this that interested you. We do have 2 more core conversations coming up this semester. Krishnan Venkatesh of St. John's College, Santa Fe will be doing a core conversation with us on the Chinese historian Sima Chan, and the live conversation will be February 11th. His remarks will be up on our website a couple of weeks before that. And then finally, March 11th, Mary Townsend will join us to talk about Simone de Beauvoir. Mary is a philosophy professor at St. John's University in New York. And again, her remarks will be up on our site a couple of weeks before for that day. So so please join us to talk to Seemee, join us for the rest of the core conversations, and please register for the conference so that all of us can come together and talk about these things and many others face to face. So see you all soon. Thanks again, Seemee. Bye, everybody.